Hello and welcome to Sacred Harmony. I'm Simon Lole, and after a lifetime spent working as an organist and director of music at churches and cathedrals across the UK, I want to share some of my passion for church music with you. We're going to discover the stories behind some famous hymns. I'll be talking to the hymn writer David Evans, and we'll be exploring connections between hymn lyrics, their tunes, and how they got their names. We'll also be joined by our quartet, who will be singing for us later in the show. Many of my favourite hymns are long-established traditional hymns, but my heart's always been open to more contemporary offerings. And there's one worship song in particular that really speaks to me and moves me every time I hear it or sing it. And that's David Evans' "Be Still for the Presence of the Lord." For me, it has a real spiritual depth, which, combined with a beautiful singing melody, makes for a truly moving and powerful song. It's interesting that David wrote both the words and the music, which for me makes it even more special. So how did this hymn come about? David was born into a lifelong army family who didn't attend church at all. His father was an army officer who came from a solid Welsh nonconformist mining stock. As a young boy, David excelled in music, having started piano lessons at the age of 7. He remembers writing little songs and lyrics from a very early age. Like all of us, as a teenager, he rebelled a little and discovered pop and rock and played in a local rock band. Through the band, he met a girlfriend who was a member of the local Baptist church, and David went along to church with her. Here, he was confronted with ideas and feelings that were new, but fresh and exciting, and it wasn't long before he was baptized as a full member of that church. For a while, David's thoughts turned seriously towards full-time Christian church ministry. Having met friends in the early house church movement, David was excited by the vibrancy and the vision of this young church, full of young families and students, creating a lively community. Although describing himself at the time as being primarily evangelical charismatic, David's sympathies were very broad. He was attracted to elements of Catholicism and to the Orthodox Church. He read widely the Christian mystics, the religious poetry of John Donne and George Herbert, amongst others, and he studied the great traditional hymn writers, gaining a particular love for the Wesleys. Such traditional interests meant that David sometimes struggled to fit in with his often more contemporary thinking church peers, as he hankered to be an influence for change. And it was this desire for change that led David to write "Be Still" in 1985. He says he actually wrote it in the space of 1 hour in a very creative surge. David recalls that he started to become rather disillusioned by a growing formulaic character to worship. He felt that the church was becoming obsessed with getting God to turn up, having some sort of profound experience, rather than just worshipping him for himself. And this, he feels, has been a fundamental problem with contemporary popular church worship ever since. For David, the basis of all worship is the recognition that God is already with us. We don't have to stir up our emotions to achieve a feeling of his presence. So in writing "Be Still", David was attempting to achieve a way of providing a simple song for people to reflect on the fact that God is here as the very starting point of their worship. "Be Still" was first sung at the South and West Bible Week in the summer of 1986. Very soon, its popularity spread to churches of all types, firstly by word of mouth, and then the song appeared on the BBC's Songs of Praise programme, spreading it even further afield, and it's become a regular song in so many places of worship ever since. For several years in the 1990s, it was #1 in the UK Christian chart, and in 2013 was voted the 3rd most popular hymn of all time by BBC Songs of Praise viewers. To this day, it continues to move people the world over. David believes that the power of "Be Still" is not primarily in the words or in the music, but in the fact that it simply seeks to remind us that God is here.
Be still for the presence of the Lord, the Holy One is here. still, for the glory of the Lord is shining all around, shining all around. He burns with holy fire, the splendor is Christ Be still, for the power of the Lord is moving in this place. He comes to cleanse and to minister His grace. Hearts will yearn for Him, and faith receive from Him. Be still, for the power of the Lord is moving in this place. Be still, for the power of the Lord is moving in this place.
Thank you so much to our quartet, and I'm absolutely delighted to say that David Evans joins me now in the studio. Welcome, David.
Hi, Simon.
I was quite genuine when I said that Be Still is really one of my favourite hymns. It moves me every time that I come across it or I have to sing it. And the fact that you wrote it in an hour,
Yeah.
tell us a little bit more about how that came to be.
Well, I think you've already said some a bit of the story in your introduction, but I think I was involved in the early house church movement, as you were saying,
Yeah.
and which I loved. I had a wonderful time. But one of the things that started to frustrate me was that the worship, as you said, became somewhat formulaic.
Yeah.
And we were very enthusiastic, and we barnstormed the gates of God each week, each Sunday morning when we came to worship. But I was beginning to feel that there was actually more to the more potential in worship than we were experiencing.
Yeah.
I felt there were aspects to God that we weren't considering so much. And I think one of those aspects was just actually being quiet and being aware of other aspects of his nature.
Yeah.
Sometimes you can just get very enthusiastic and not think very much. So I think my aim with Be Still was just to get people just to think and reflect and to take them on a little journey.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Yes.
To make them aware that, first of all, that God is here, and then to follow that up a little and say, what does it mean that God is here? Who is God?
Yeah.
It's always a good thing to remind ourselves about that when we come to worship. Who are we coming to worship? What's he like?
Yes.
And so taking people on a little journey into the holiness of
Yeah.
God,
Yeah.
and dropping little metaphors in here and there just to kind of emphasize that a little bit more.
Mm-hmm.
The whole thing of standing on holy ground.
Yes,
Trying to
yeah.
make the presence of God something that's potentially abstract, something actually sort of much more real and concrete to people.
Yeah.
So that was my desire, and I think that had been building up, I think, probably for a few years.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of my inspiration had come from reading, older hymns and some of the texts that you mentioned. And I think probably it all came out one night.
Fantastic.
It all came out one night, very, very quickly. So, yeah,
Did you
that's
start?
the story.
I know that you wrote both the music and the words. I mean, when you were thinking about it, was it the words that came to you first, and then you thought you would illustrate those with the music, or was it the other way around? You had a tune popping around your head.
I think when I write, it varies. Sometimes I have a tune,
Yeah.
and sometimes blissful moments. I actually have a little bit of both, which is a good stimulus.
Yes, which is what happened on this occasion, I assume.
Well, I think I probably started off with this occasion just with a feeling, you know, that I wanted to write something that really could make people aware that God is here. I wanted to write something special. You know, what could I write that could really draw people in and see something new, you know, in the nature of God and deepen their worship.
And I think
it was with that burden. But I think from what I can vaguely remember, it was a long time ago now. But what I can vaguely remember, you know, is that I think I just started off with that sense: just be still, be still, for the presence of the Lord is here. And I think I just started off with that, and I think that the tune came
out of
and
that.
then it all just kind of flowed. Almost, I took myself on a journey. I took myself on the story. And
well, if I may say so, it worked extremely well.
Oh,
I
thank you.
wonder actually whether, did you expect, I know you weren't thinking about it when you were writing it, but do you expect it to be as popular as it's become?
Not at all, no. I mean, I just shoved it away. I thought, well, that's interesting. I didn't even bother to teach it in church. But it's a very, I mean, can I tell a very, very special story, which I don't think anybody really knows. But you mentioned that it became well known, first of all, at the South and West Bible Week back in 1986. Well, at the church I was involved with, we had a musicians meeting for the Bible Week to decide which songs were going to go in the songbook. And so I thought, I think I might try that one. I'd written a few others as well, but I thought, we'll try that one. And so my turn came. I picked up my guitar, and a bit worried what people's response was going to be, I shut my eyes and I sang it through. And then I opened my eyes, and it was quite extraordinary because these things didn't really happen very much in the church. But I looked round, and half the people in the room were on their knees. Some people were crying, and I felt a bit awkward really, because I thought, what's going on? This is new.
How are they reacting?
Help. And so I felt at that time that something sort of quite special, you know, had been received. You know, something sort of beyond the ordinary. And then, you know, from the South and West Bible Week and onwards, I've just been so humbled by just some of the amazing stories, you know, that people have told me.
Oh, that's
how
wonderful.
Be Still has actually just profoundly touched their lives. And I think, wow.
I'm sure.
So I think really it's not, you know, it's not much to do with me really, as you say, because I don't think it's particularly, there's elements of the tune and the words, and it takes people on a journey, but I think it's just reminding, I think for people to just be reminded that the fact is God is here. Wow, that's just such a special idea, such a special concept to have in our mind.
Now, David, I know that you've been very influenced by the traditional hymn writers, particularly by the Wesleys and that whole Methodist tradition. But in your contemporary writing today, do you see a connection between the old and the new? Are you aware, or are you bringing some of the old influences into your writing today?
Yeah, I think a lot of contemporary sort of church writing is emphasising, you know, God doing new things, you know, and that's vitally important and exciting. But I think something that I've become increasingly aware of is just how much heritage of Christian writing, Christian poetry, people who love God down through the ages, and this is such a treasury of heritage that we have. And there's the danger that in doing new things, that we can throw the baby out with the bathwater, you know. And what I've been wanting to do is to try and sort of bring sort of bits of the baby back, you know. And I think some of the concern of the contemporary sort of church has been that some of the old traditional stuff was a bit dry and dusty, you know. And that's possibly true in terms of how things have progressed through the years, but I mean, like a lot of the Wesley hymns, you know, it's they were born in the fires of revival, passion, and I think, you know, if we can actually draw upon that to inspire, you know, current writing, you know, that's fantastic. So that's what I'm trying to do, is to make the best of the old relevant, particularly by sort of writing music that's actually going to convey that, you know, to a more contemporary audience.
Well, I'll tell you what, can I test you out on something? Can we go around to the piano? And I've got a little idea for you now. So let's come around. One of the things that fascinates me is the fact that sometimes we're a bit wooden in our performances, and that if you write a new tune to songs all the time, and I'd like to know what would happen if we put a new tune to some very well-known words, if you see what I mean. Can you think of a hymn that might work like that?
Let's have a go at a famous one. Why
Yep.
don't we try Wesley's Love Divine or Love's Excelling?
Okay, so
Okay.
just remind us how the tune goes
Right.
that everybody knows.
I'm no singer, I shall attempt. So we normally sing to it's a famous tune by Stainer,
Yeah.
which goes, Love divine or love's excelling, joy of heaven to earth come down.
That's the one, yep.
Yeah. Beautiful tune.
Yeah.
It's a lovely tune, but perhaps a little bit plodding.
Yeah.
And the beauty of Wesley's words, one of the problems with having a single hymn tune to, through an entire hymn is that there's such a range of emotions often present in hymns. And a single tune isn't really up to the job, I don't think.
No.
Yeah, I don't think a single tune can ever really be up to the job. Can never convey all the different nuances that are there. So, I mean, on the one hand, you've got I think as a composer writing a new tune, you've got to decide what you're going to go for, what
Yeah,
you feel is
yeah.
important to you. And on the one hand, I mean, there is the magnificence. I mean, magnificent words, the magnificence of God's love, love divine or love's excelling. You know, and one could really write a magnificent, sort of noble tune to that. On the other hand, I like doing things differently. I like bringing out nuances that perhaps people haven't thought of before. I've done a tune to Love Divine, or Love's Excelling, a few
Give us
years
a little.
ago, which and what I wanted to do, I'd read the words and I just sensed the intimacy of God within them. That Charles Wesley was bringing that out as well. Love
Yeah.
divine or love's excelling, joy of heaven to earth come down, and it's not just up there, but fixing us. thy
So
humble
more
dwelling.
personal,
making
really.
it personal.
Yeah,
So I'm not sure if I can remember fully how to play this one, but
the
it goes
idea.
something like this. Yeah. So I wanted to bring a tenderness out from the lyrics. So, and also, Stainer's tune was in plodding 4/4 time, whereas I've given it a little 3-time lilt, which just adds that little sense of intimacy, and to it as well. So here we go. Love divine or love's excelling, joy of heaven to earth come down. And it carries on that. Fix in us your humble dwelling, with your faithful mercies crown. One of the troubles with plodding tunes is often they don't go anywhere.
Yeah,
And I like
yeah.
to kind of play around with the rhythm as well. So then
Very
changing and lifting a little bit. I'm not sure if I can reach the high note. Jesus, thou art all compassion, pure unbounded love thou art.
Gosh,
Yeah.
very, very
And
different.
then builds
yes,
up,
yes.
yeah, and
Yeah.
then visit us with thy salvation. A little bit more intimate, and then building up and enter every trembling.
Gosh, yes.
So sort of taking people on a little bit of emotional journey.
Absolutely.
Varying things as much as you can within the
Yes,
confines of the
Yes, a real
of the
challenge.
strophic
No,
structure of the hymn.
very, very beautiful indeed. I've got one last question for you. It's lovely to hear how your mind works when you're facing the challenges. Do you need a strong faith to be a good hymn writer? Does that matter?
Well, I think possibly if you didn't have a strong faith, you could create something that might superficially seem
Yeah,
quite
yeah,
impressive.
yeah.
But I think what you get, in a very special hymn, written by a believer, is they're searching for imagery, they're searching for metaphor, they're searching for language that's actually expressing their inner experience.
Yeah.
And I think if you're approaching superficially something that was written by a non-believer,
Yeah.
it might superficially have all the right aspects to it, but I don't think it would hang together as a whole. And it's that hanging together of a whole
Yeah.
that touches people's
Yeah, no, I understand.
touches people's
that. That's
hearts.
correct.
So
Yeah.
yes and no, I think is your
A fair answer. Good. Well, I found that really fascinating, getting into the mind of a contemporary hymn writer. At the end of the show today, David and his daughter are going to perform one of his latest hymns, which I'm really looking forward to. But for now, David, thanks very much.
Thanks, Simon.
We often say we have a favourite hymn, But when we say that, do we mean a favourite poem or a favourite tune? And do we all associate a particular hymn with a particular tune? And what happens if you sing an old favourite to a new tune? Does it lose its appeal, or does it gain a new freshness? The editors of new hymn collections were very influential in the pairing of texts and words. They needed to find the texts that were capable of communicating quite complex theological concepts to normal, everyday people. And then they needed to pair those texts with tunes which were easily singable and reflected the style and emotion of the text. Hymns were written in certain syllabic meters, and so tunes had to correspond to those meters. Simplicity, though, was one of the main characteristics of successful hymnody. It's interesting to see how some hymns have an almost exclusive link to a certain tune. I think of hymns like Holy, 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 which I can't even imagine being sung to any other tune than the John Dykes Nicaea. Other texts, on the other hand, are associated with a number of tunes. Over 1,000 Tongues to Sing fits nicely to at least 4 tunes that I know. Then there are certain tunes that are used for a number of different texts. Dix, a tune which is often associated with the hymn As with Gladness Men of Old, is often regularly paired with For the Beauty of the Earth and God of Mercy, God of Grace, to name but 2. For me, sometimes to pair an old favourite with a new tune brings a fresh insight into the meaning of the text and adds a new shine to perhaps a slightly wooden performance. I think of Maurice Bevan's tune Corvedale to the hymn There's a Wideness in God's Mercy, or that wonderful tune by Ken Naylor, Cofen, which truly lifts How Shall I Sing That Majesty. But what of the hymn names that I find so fascinating? Fundamentally, tunes were named simply to identify them. The name was chosen either by the composer or by the editor of a new hymnal. And to me, that's where the fascination lies. Why that particular name? As you might expect, there are lots of reasons for the naming of tunes: practical, sentimental, fanciful, and personal. Let's look at how a few of them came into being. Some of the earliest hymn tunes were based on early plain chant, and their names reflected that: Victimae Paschali, Vene Creata Spiritus, and Dies Irae. Later, we find commonly used church tunes are being named by a particular city or a diocese: Canterbury, York, or Rochester. With the coming of the hymns of the Wesleys, who were looked upon by uncompromising churchmen as heretics, leading hymn writers of the time were discouraged to associate themselves with these new texts. This led to a number of amateur musicians writing some very fine tunes which were named after churches, streets, people, and places. Denominational leanings also have affected hymn tune names. The Presbyterians of the late 19th century often used the names of various mission stations. The Lutherans showed a preference for names of places where J.S. Bach had some association. The Methodists have chosen places associated with the travels of the Wesleys. Other influences have included biblical place names, native towns of composers, Christian virtues and countries. Sir Arthur Sullivan cheekily named tunes after hostesses with whom he'd stayed for long weekends, even making them into saints, his most famous being Saint Gertrude, which we know today as the tune for Onward Christian Soldiers. Sir John Stainer, on the other hand, was quite painstaking in his choice of tune names, always meaningful and being suggested by the sense of the text. All for Jesus, Adoration, and Cross of Jesus being good examples. So there are a variety of different reasons why tunes are called by their names. So what are my favourites? I have so many. But I do think of Ray Vaughan Williams' lovely tune, Down Ampney, setting the words, Come down, O love divine. And that's right up there for me. Down Ampney was the name of the village where Vaughan Williams was born, in the Cotswolds. Cofen, that I mentioned earlier, is another favourite of mine. That was a semi-rural meadowland in Cambridge, near the school where composer Ken Naylor taught. Herbert Howell's magnificent tune, Michael, set to the words, All my hope on God is founded, is written as a tribute to his only son, who died at a tender young age. Others that I love include East Acklam, the birthplace of organist and composer Francis Jackson, and sung to the words, "For the fruits of his creation." And Palace Green by Michael Fleming, who worked at Croydon Minster as the organist, and that was close to the old palace, an original home of the Archbishop of Canterbury. This is often sung to the words, "Sing praise to God who reigns above." So, from Farley Castle to Ebenezer, from Stockport to Rustington, from Rosimedra to Vienna, there are names aplenty, and behind every one is a fascinating story, an amusing anecdote, or a very scholarly reason. That's why I love hymn tune names so much. Thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you next time on Sacred Harmony. We'll close today's show with a hymn by my guest, David Evans, "Jesus, Your Boundless Love to Me," and it's performed by David and his daughter Catherine.
Jesus, your boundless love to me, no thought can reach, no tongue declare. From earthly idols my heart free, and reign without a rival there. Yours wholly, yours alone I am, with heaven's love all my being inflame. With heaven's love all my being inflame. Oh, grant that no